Hi, welcome back to Season 4 of the Tummy Team Journey. I am Kelly Dean, physical therapist and founder of the Tummy Team, and I'm your host. This is the podcast where we talk about how investing in your functional core and pelvic floor strength can actually change your life. So let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Tummy Team Journey podcast. Joining me today is my friend and colleague, Megan Miller, and she's a physical therapist, a pelvic floor PT, but also a Tummy Team trained practitioner. And she also joins me on some of our professional training courses that we do when we travel around and teach about functional core and pelvic floor rehab. And we decided that it would be really fun to do a podcast or even a series of podcasts if it turns into that on different topics that are really common but that people just don't know enough about. And today we're going to tackle the topic of functional core and pelvic floor with seniors. And I just wanted to say hi, Megan, how are you? And welcome back.
Hi, Kelly. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to talk to you, and I'm excited to be here. And I know we both share an equal passion for helping all people with core and pelvic floor dysfunction, but we both are always really happy and excited to talk about how that applies to seniors specifically. So thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I know. We do have that in common. We both have a history in our career of working with seniors and elderly in different uh like in skilled nursing facilities, in home health, in rehab centers, in hospitals, even in your clinic, and I see them online. And
Mhm.
I just have such a heart for that demographic, and I feel like with functional core and pelvic floor stuff, they have been so underserved. And so there's so much poor information out there that I hope that this podcast can help people understand a little bit better and be encouraged and have some hope. And even if you're listening and you're not a senior, someday you will be. And or you maybe have a senior family member, a parent, or an aunt or an uncle or a friend or a colleague. And I think it's just important for us to just start changing the mindset of what this looks like. And what one of the things I say all the time is common and normal are not the same thing. Just because
Mhm.
something's common does not mean it's normal, and does not mean that we don't address it or treat it or have hope that it could be better. So
Mhm.
that's the heart behind this, all of our podcasts, but this specific podcast. I am finding in this, for some reason, in this time in my career, especially for my online clients, a huge percentage of my online clients are over 60 years old, men and
Mhm.
women. And that wasn't how it was, you know, that wasn't the situation even 10 years ago for me. So I don't
Mhm.
know if what's happening that I'm getting more of those people, or if just the marketing that I do attracts those people, or nobody else. Most of the pelvic floor stuff out there is for prenatal and postpartum, which we can have a whole another podcast about that because that's
Mhm.
important too.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but I'm just curious. I would love to talk about kind of what you're seeing in your clinic, what your demographics are. And I just feel like I want people to realize that it's just not like inevitable and you're just going to get to a certain point where you're wetting your pants all the time, and you have to wear Depends and there's nothing you can do. I want
Right.
to not be in that place.
In that place, exactly. Well, it's interesting. I've been similar to you. I've been doing pelvic core and pelvic floor physical therapy for 25 years. And I would say in the beginning of my career, it's interesting. A lot of the clients I worked with, now I was in a different setting, I was in a hospital based setting then. A lot of the clients I worked with in the beginning were clients in their 60s, 70s, and beyond initially. And then through the course of these 25 years, I've seen some fluctuations where as I got further along that path, I was working much more with like a younger population. So seeing a lot of, especially women kind of in that like prenatal, postpartum, perimenopause, menopause kind of time of life. And I still see a good bit of that demographic also. But for a time there, I was seeing less of the senior population. It was interesting and
Mhm.
more kind of that. Childbearing, postnatal, perimenopause, menopause phase. And now I feel like I have gotten to this place where I have a really good mix of both, which like makes me really happy. Yeah. I think initially I was seeing, the clients I worked with in the beginning were more of a senior population, maybe more with like bladder leakage type of issues, that kind of thing. Then it had this shift to kind of a younger population, which that made me happy because it made me realize that the word was getting more out and like people were having more conversations about core and pelvic floor dysfunction and people were seeking out help at a younger age, which is wonderful. But then I'm not sure in that time I was seeing maybe less of those seniors. And now it's kind of swung back where I have this nice mix. In fact,
Yeah.
the client I just finished with right before we started this podcast, is an 82-year-old male who had a prostatectomy 10 years ago and never had therapy for it at that time and is just now learning all of this about core and pelvic floor strengthening and
Mhm.
posture and function. And it's amazing at 84 he's like making gains in strength and improving his posture and like it's just so exciting. I was just said to him as he was leaving, I'm so excited because he's, learning all of these new skills and he's seeing improvements. And it's really cool to know that it's never too late to make improvements in this area.
100%. And
Yeah.
what I love about that particular case, scenario is two things: male, or three things: male, 84, and 10 years after the surgery,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
so much we have this. I don't know where the messaging is coming from, but I don't know if it's coming from physicians, from our society, from just generation. But it's like, if you don't get treatment right after a procedure, it's over.
Hmm.
It's like you got a year to get it, 6 weeks, 6 months, whatever. And if you don't get therapy, then it is what it is, and live with it. I think that we think when you're in your 80s, you know, good luck, so
Hmm.
sorry.
Hmm.
You know, and I think men, um, what's interesting, I think I have a unique relationship or you know, outlook on men because I have a lot of men on my schedule. But I think it's because I offer services to men
Hmm.
and a lot of
Hmm.
people don't. Um, but I think that men sometimes are like more willing to get help than women. Women are kind of like, well, that's just what happens after you have kids. My grandma wet her pants, my mom wet her pants, my cousin sneezes and wets her pants. It's just what it is.
Right.
Um, Whereas men are like, I do not want to wet my pants. What is going on?
Right.
Please
Right.
help me. But then they're
Right.
also like, there's not as many services, or they have to go in for services where there are pregnant women or postpartum women, and it just feels weird. But we're going to have a whole nother talk on men because that's
Yeah.
a whole nother thing.
A whole other
But
thing.
I love
Yes.
that you shared that situation. um, let's talk about the conditions in general. Kind of like, what symptoms do we see with you know with pelvic floor? What is core and pelvic floor in anybody, but specifically in the seniors that we see?
Yeah. So I would say some of the common symptoms that seniors will experience, that I work with. Number one would be urinary incontinence, so which is the unwanted loss of urine at a time when you're not intentionally voiding. So people who have leakage with like coughing, sneezing, laughing, any kind of impact, exercise potentially. Um, that type of leakage, there's two main types of bladder leakage that people can have, and that type that I just described is called stress urinary incontinence. So that basically anything inherent with that, like I'm going to use a cough for example. When you have a really strong cough or a strong sneeze, that increases what we call your intra-abdominal pressure, and that pressure kind of in that moment kind of has to go somewhere, so it goes down kind of right through your center of gravity, right where your bladder is. And if your pelvic floor muscles and your deep core muscles are not strong enough to kind of react, or coordinated enough to react in that moment to that change in pressure, then people will have leakage in that moment. So that's one type. The other type that's really common, especially in kind of a more senior population, is something called urge incontinence. The mechanism of that is a little bit different. So that's where people get very strong and frequent urges that they have to use the bathroom, which might not actually match the volume of urine in their bladder, but they get these repeated strong urges through the day. And the bladder is actually a muscle. So the bladder lining itself is having these little spasms or contractions during the day. Someone will feel that and of course start to go, walk to the bathroom. The bladder's continuing to contract and send those urge messages to the brain. And if that is stronger in that moment than what the pelvic floor and core can support, then someone may have leakage. Like on the way to the bathroom is really common. People will describe having leakage once they're in the bathroom, but trying to get clothing down. That's like a big trigger for people. And that urge type of incontinence does seem to have some environmental triggers with it. So, running water is a trigger for a lot of people. It sounds kind of funny, but putting a key in a lock. So, like if you've been out away from the house and you get home and you put your key in the lock,
Yep.
that's a big trigger for people. So there are some kind of environmental things that can affect that as well. So those are the two main types. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting, because I've talked in the past about like the different types of urinary incontinence on this podcast, just like in an informational one. But what I'm starting to see a little bit more in seniors. So I kind of describe those two main types, like the stress incontinence being coordination, strength, um, you know, connection kind of
Hmm.
thing that's going on. And then the urgency is a sensory feedback loop kind of. There is a strength component to it, but it's like their brain is getting uh, overreactive signals from the
Yes.
bladder
Yes.
that are
Yes.
not accurate. And then when we respond to them, we are almost perpetuating that
Yes.
reaction. And so it's like
Yes.
Pavlov's dog a little bit, like, when you
Yes.
press the remote control to open you're going to pee when you get home from running errands. So when you put the key in the door or you hit the remote to open up your garage door, all of a sudden your body's like, there's like almost like, do you remember when you're breastfeeding, you have that letdown? Like,
Yes.
oh,
Yes.
now it's kind of like
Yeah.
that. It's like we know we're going
Yeah.
to nurse. Oh, the milk is coming out.
Yeah.
We know we're gonna get
That's a
to
good.
pee. We're gonna we're gonna we're gonna start
Yeah.
peeing.
Yeah.
And
That's a
so
good way to
then there's
think
this
about it. Yeah.
sensory component to it. And what I see is I feel like my younger population tends to have a little bit more of the stress
Hmm.
coordination thing, and my older population has more of the urgency thing. Now they can have
Hmm.
both, and often they do. If they have the urgency, they usually have the stress as well. But
Hmm.
often I feel like our seniors are having more of the urgency, and our men are having more of the urgency than the
Hmm.
stress. Do you
Yeah.
see that, or would you
Yeah.
say you see a mix of both all the time?
I no, I would agree with that. I would say often see probably a little bit more of the urgency. Often I do see a mix of both, but if someone in a more senior population, if someone has both, I would say more often or not than not, the main like problematic part of it is the urgency part. So they may
Yeah,
have that. And then they also may say, oh, but I also leak a little bit when I sneeze, but it's a little bit less on their radar than the urgency is really like the urgent continence is really affecting their quality of life and
everything.
day to day.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Everything,
Hmm.
everything,
Right.
because
Right.
it starts to impact, like you said, quality of life. This is not just like an inconvenience. It gets to the point where people, don't go to certain places because they might not be able to get to the bathroom in time. They stop limiting leaving the home,
Hmm.
because they might leak. They stop interacting with their social environments, like, they don't like we have situations in our family where they don't want to come to like our church Easter service with
Hmm.
us because there's a lot of people there. I might have to wait for the bathroom.
Hmm.
I can't predict like the anxiety of that. And as those limitations start to be in place, it starts to decrease their joy of life. They're missing out on interacting with their families. They become very
Hmm.
isolated and depressed. But then there's the other component where they don't want to wet their pants, so they are rushing to the bathroom,
Hmm.
which leads to tripping or falling or hurting
Hmm.
themselves, or and any and then unfortunately, unfortunately, the anxiety related to needing to go to the bathroom or being afraid you're not going to make it actually makes it worse,
Yes.
right? Like, as
100%.
soon as our
Yes.
heart rate is up, as soon as we're anxious, as soon as we're in that part, it creates a bladder spasm that
Yes.
is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yes, 100%. Yes. And I always say the bladder is really cool because it can really be trained to do what we want it to do. But in this case, it's kind of a negative training. And so
Yeah,
I always kind of use this example like everybody's bladder roughly has about a 16-ounce capacity. So like if this, I don't know if you can see my hands, if this is your
yeah,
bladder capacity, right? But you're getting an urge signal here, right? For people just
yeah,
listening, my hands are really close together at like a
yeah,
very low volume. If that's where you're getting that urgency signal, and then you're thinking, okay, I'm going to just go because I have a little bit of this sensation, that feedback loop kind of gets formed. And then over time, of responding to those very small urges, every time your bladder fills to that point, it's then going to start to trigger, well, this is where we go. And so then that urge signal gets
yeah,
stronger at that much lower volume. Yeah. So
yeah.
but
It's
again,
just like training anything, but we can reverse it
yeah,
because we can
but we can
train it
reverse
the
it.
other way.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that's the
Yeah,
hopeful part of this is that you can absolutely retrain it and improve that capacity, which I find that clients are always amazed about how quickly that can happen. Like that process can really be reversed in a relatively short period of time. It takes some intention and it takes some
yeah.
thought and some work, but it really can be retrained. It's amazing.
Well, that's what's exciting to me is that understanding understanding the anatomy and the science behind how our body works, um, is really eye opening to clients, right? It's really helpful for them to understand, like, oh, this it's not just broken. It's not like, oh, it's just broken. Like, my bladder's really small. Your bladder did not change size. Your
Hmm.
bladder is the same size as it was when you could hold it. You know,
Right,
it's
right.
that you have trained it. And I think that Pavlov's dog kind of scenario is like, if every time you ring a bell, you're gonna get to pee, you hear a bell, you have to pee. That's where the water
Right,
running, it sounds like the toilet, right? It sounds
right,
like peeing, right?
right.
Um, I even talk to people about when they're going into the bathroom to not think, and you actually helped me with
Mhm.
this,
Mhm.
but I've kind of taken it to another level, to not think about the toilet, do not look at the toilet, do not, and even
Mhm.
have a planned thing, that's something else you're thinking about, so that you can, because the more you fixate on it, the more your body is like, oh, the toilet is where we pee. We might as well start peeing now. And
Yes.
I don't want to oversimplify it, but I also don't want to overcomplicate it. It's sometimes what we tell our body to do, it will do. And whatever we do the most wins, good
Mhm.
and bad. So
Mhm.
retraining that and getting a plan and a strategy can be really helpful. And along those lines, when we're looking at urge incontinence being a little bit more common in seniors, I feel like urge incontinence is easier to treat than stress incontinence. I think they both are treatable, but I think urge incontinence is maybe not easier, but has a quicker uh, improvement, arc. It's a faster
Mhm.
improvement arc. Um,
Mhm.
the
Yeah, I would agree with that.
yeah, and I think the important thing when people are doing this work is for them to start with some kind of bladder diary that
Mhm.
shows how often they were going or leaking or having trouble or having problems, because um you might say, like, I'll give a random example. You might say you were getting up 10 times a night to go to the bathroom, and this is
Mhm.
actually an example from my father-in-law, getting up 10
Mhm.
times a night to go to the bathroom. And once we did some stuff with him, he was getting up 4 times a night. 4 times a night is still too much, but it is 60% better
But it's way
than
better
10
than
times a
10.
night,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So
Mhm.
so we could easily, we're such a negative feedback system, we could say, oh,
Mhm.
but I still wet my pants. Yes, but we have to see that we're getting better, right?
Mhm.
It's from 10 to 4 is a
It's
huge
huge.
improvement. So
Yeah,
having some objective data, so we're not just going on our subjective feelings, or am I getting better? Because any kind of leakage is not okay. Any kind of
right.
leakage is something that we are not going to be okay with, but we have to get see some progress to be consistent, to keep moving
Yes.
forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, and I think you say all the time, "Better is better," and so in this example of my 84-year-old client who was just here, I don't think we're probably gonna get to 100% dry with him, and we've had that conversation, but if we can get even 50% better and he can go from wearing 6 disposable briefs a day to 2 or, to 1 or 2, that would be a huge improvement. So, while it might not be 100%, it's hugely better. And that impacts
Yes.
quality of life and finances, having to buy the pads, and there's like a lot of layers that it can affect. So, just
Yeah.
having hope that there is absolutely a path to better, I think is really encouraging for people. Mhm.
I agree. Any amount of better is better.
Mhm.
And especially in our seniors, where we're expecting a decline and a deterioration,
Mhm.
to go the other direction is actually even better, right? Like,
Right. Right.
it's like with you're if they're expecting, or just aging alone, we're expecting this, and instead we come up, like, the difference between where we expect it to be and where we end up being is really powerful.
Is
Yeah,
amazing. It really is. Yeah, it really is.
yeah.
Um, so okay, so that was bladder leakage, talking a little bit about that. Some of the other symptoms that I commonly see in seniors. So another one would be fecal incontinence, so leakage of stool. Um, Constipation can definitely be another symptom that people experience. And I'd say another real common one is pelvic organ prolapse. So that is where you can have descent of one or more of your pelvic organs within the normal pelvic space due to the pelvic floor and core muscles being weaker than we'd like them to be, and the ligaments that kind of help anchor those organs to our pelvic bones having some laxity to them. And then there's a whole, a lot of other factors that work into that, as well as in terms of posture and pressure and all of that sort of thing. But that is a very common symptom that I see in a lot of the senior clients that I work with, is having some degree of pelvic organ prolapse. And I'd say the symptoms of that would be like pelvic pressure, heaviness, feeling like they can't empty their bladder completely, feeling like they can't empty their bowels completely. Usually that pressure and heaviness tends to get a little bit worse as the day goes on, like a little bit better in the morning and then worse towards late afternoon, evening. So that is a very common thing that I see with seniors. Less common, but I am working with a couple of clients right now, and I think it's probably more common than we think, is some pelvic pain and pelvic floor tension issues and symptoms that people have. I have one client on my caseload right now who's 71, who has chronic pelvic floor tension, pain, spasm, pain with bowel movements. And then I have another one who is very, very similar symptoms, and she is in her early 80s, and has dealt with those symptoms for at least 20 years and is just now, you know, getting some help in terms of therapy. So I would say those pain and tension symptoms are a little less common from what I see in my clinic. I don't know about you, Kelly, but I'd say the leakage and the prolapse and the bowel issues are very common.
Yeah, I would say the pelvic pain and the tension seems to be with my younger
Mhm,
clients, and even my perimenopausal clients.
mhm, mhm,
And I think we should have a whole nother thing about that, because there is a whole thing about that
mhm,
hypertonic pelvic floor and the pain and pelvic pain. And there's a cultural component to that. There's
mhm,
lifestyle component to that.
mhm,
Um, and it impacts a lot of things for sure.
mhm,
I would say the constipation, the bowel movements, the prolapse, all of those things are super common,
mhm,
specifically the constipation,
mhm,
and difficult bowel movements. And some of that, is related to their diet. Some of it's related to medications that they're on. Some of
mhm,
it's related to poor bowel habits over a long period of time, disconnect to
mhm,
their core. Um, this is another thing that I'm excited to talk about in terms of, you know, prolapse. We get a lot of people that will say, oh, if your prolapse is this bad, you can only do surgery. And you can't, PT is not going to help with that. Or once you get to a certain age, there's no going back. Um, and I would love to talk a little bit about
mhm,
pelvic organ prolapse and how that's not necessarily the truth. It is complicated if it's pretty severe, but I've had some pretty severe situations that I've done some very simple things where I'm seeing them online, so I'm not even
mhm,
touching them,
mhm.
that they have had 60 to 70% improvement in their pelvic floor prolapse symptoms.
That's
So, can
awesome.
you talk on that a little bit? I'll say, I
Absolutely.
can talk about my stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So with pelvic organ prolapse, so you can have prolapse of your bladder, you can have prolapse of your uterus, you can have prolapse of the rectum, in one or any of those combinations. Um, there are different stages of prolapse. So that stage one is very mild, and then it kind of goes up to stage four. Um, I would say most commonly, in clients that I work with, people usually, I would say most commonly kind of have like around a stage two or three by the time kind of they're in sort of the senior population. Now I see a lot of younger people that have prolapse as well, kind of in more postpartum situations. But that's a common question that I get is, well, once I have a prolapse, can it go back? is exercise going to help it go back? And my answer to that is that we're not going to necessarily um, get, say we'll use the bladder as an example. We're not going to get the bladder to its original, anatomic position, but you can absolutely reduce and improve it enough that people can become asymptomatic or have very minimal, manageable symptoms with it. So people that have a stage 4 prolapse, usually that ends up being, typically a surgical correction is needed in that
Mhm.
case. But anything kind of in that 1 through 3, absolutely, people can really experience some nice reduction and certainly improvement in management of symptoms. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's definitely one of the situations where if, they've had it for a long time, it's more complicated to treat,
Hmm. Hmm.
versus a postpartum. I have had a postpartum that are 3 or 4 that were able to reduce it because it was
Hmm.
very swelling and circumstantial, and
Yes.
they
Yes.
hadn't stretched out those ligaments and tissues for a sustained amount of
Yeah.
time. We were
Yeah.
incredibly aggressively proactive about laying down, getting their feet up, using gravity,
Hmm.
allowing rest and healing to help reposition, and then
Hmm.
doing some of the strengthening and postural stuff, and then really symptom management, not powering through any symptoms so that we
Hmm.
could get it back up. And it was an aggressive approach, but not aggressive in the sense of like a major surgery when you have a 6
Right.
week old baby, right?
Right.
Like,
Right. Right.
yes, you're going to need to be um, bed bound more of the day than you expected, or
Hmm.
especially the end of the day, and need some help. But it is for a period of time to allow it to heal. I have
Hmm.
seen also in, so it's a little bit harder, um, if those tissues have been stretched out for a long time. I love how you
Mhm,
said we may not get it right back to the original anatomical position,
mhm,
but we can allow things to get into positions where they are asymptomatic or minimally
mhm,
symptomatic,
mhm,
and give you strategies to eliminate. People don't realize that there are things that they are doing throughout the day that are making the prolapse worse, that they don't
mhm,
even realize how they're coughing, how they're straining to have a bowel movement, how they're
mhm,
lifting, how
mhm,
they're getting in and out of bed, how they're sitting in the car, how they're sitting in the recliner. There's things that we're doing that create pressure or stretch certain tissues or don't allow certain muscles to be active, so they become weak, what we call disuse atrophy. They're not
mhm,
being used, so they get weaker and weaker, and now they can't support the way they are. So a lot of it is just letting your body, teaching people how to get their body to work for them and to
mhm,
eliminate the things that are making it worse. I always use this analogy, like if you have a flood in your basement and
mhm.
you are great with buckets and towels, but nobody turns the water off, you are never going anywhere. You've got to find the leak. You've got to turn the water
Yes.
off, and
Yes,
then the buckets and towels are going to be super effective. So,
yes.
stopping the things, understanding and removing, eliminating, minimizing the movement patterns, the breath holding, the straining, the stuff that you're doing
Mhm,
is like it's over 50% of the solution.
mhm, mhm.
And when we and again, when we're thinking 50% better, 50% better, you know?
Is
That's
huge.
super,
Yes.
that's great.
Yeah.
If you were thinking in
Yes.
an investment in a bank and they gave you a 50% interest rate, you would be like,
You
"Yes, I
take
want
it.
that." You know?
Yeah.
But we're
Yes,
like, "No, if I don't get
absolutely.
100%, I'm not gonna
Right,
do it." You know?
right,
Better is
right.
better. Start with
Yeah.
something.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And there are, in addition, more things that we can do as well, but just not putting your head in the sand saying, "Oh, oh well, this is
right,
my life now, you
right.
know?
Right. And prolapse, just like diastasis in the abdominal wall, is very, as you were just saying, is very pressure dependent. So um,
Yes.
following along with what you were saying, looking at ways to just minimize that pressure in all the things that we do throughout the day, I agree, is 50% of the solution.
Yeah.
Is taking that piece out and removing that pressure, and then kind of layering on top of that, learning how to use your core and your pelvic floor muscles and your breath a little bit differently becomes so much more effective because you're not fighting against this pressure component all through the day.
Right.
So and I
Right.
think people are, I know when I talk to clients, they're surprised at how simple some of the strategies can be towards that end. Yes.
Right. You
Yes,
still have
yes.
to do it. You
Oh,
still
yes.
have to
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah.
but it is not like we're asking you to do hundreds of exercises a day. Um, no. It's it's
No.
it's it's like, can we adjust how you sit in the car?
Mhm.
Could
And get out
I
of a
have you
chair and yeah.
and how you get out of
Mhm.
chair,
Mhm.
how you
Mhm.
breathe when you're having a bowel movement,
Mhm.
and, can when you're feeling any of those symptoms, can I convince you to lay down with a pillow underneath your hips for
Mhm.
15 to 30 minutes?
Mhm.
Like,
Yep.
that is what I'm asking of you,
Yes,
you know?
yes. Yeah,
Um,
and I say this all the time, a lot of, like, when you're thinking about these types of lifestyle kind of adjustments or strategies, there is definitely some intention and some thought that goes into that, and especially in the
right,
beginning. I always tell clients, now there's gonna be some thinking about this and some intention, it's gonna be more on your radar, but the goal is for it to become very reflexive over time, where you don't, that just becomes the new way that you get out of the chair and you don't really think about it. Yeah, in fact, again, I'm going to use my client that was just here. I've been working with him on a pressure management strategy of getting out of a chair a little bit differently. So when he gets out of the chair, instead of holding his breath and bearing down and pushing out, I'm having him just blow. And this is something you and I talk about a lot, Kelly, blow as he goes. So
mhm,
blowing out or exhaling as he gets out of the chair. And he also, he and his wife shared with me, he has a little bit of early stages of dementia. So in the beginning of when we were working together, I was constantly cueing him, like, okay, before we stand up, we're going to blow as we get out of the chair. And his wife is very supportive, and has been kind of, you know, telling him that and
reinforcing
encouraging
it.
him that, reinforcing at home. And today, now he came today. I haven't actually seen him in about a month because of the holidays and whatnot. He stood up from the chair and just blew. Nobody told him, nobody said anything. He just automatically did it. And I said, "Oh my goodness." And his wife said, "I know, he just started doing it like on his own. His body and his brain just like adapted that
It
strategy."
clicked.
It clicked, and I think it's because that changing that way that he's using his breath organically helps him use his core a little bit differently, and it feels easier to get out of the chair
It
that
is.
way. And so that's
It
how
is
it
easy.
sticks. That's how it sticks and becomes this habit. That's what your body wants to do because it feels better. So
And
that was
that's
exciting
the
to see.
trick, and why I even, we talk about functional core and pelvic floor. We really talk about how the body functions, and the strategies we're giving our clients, um, are, um, in everyday functions, like every time he gets out of a chair, right?
Mhm,
But also they're recruiting the patterns that are the most effective for the body to work. So even
mhm,
though they might feel unfamiliar at first,
mhm,
they logically make sense to people,
mhm.
and then they work better. Like
Right.
teaching people how to use a squatty potty or how to exhale and relax their pelvic floor for bowel movements instead of hunch, hold their breath, and bear down feels
Mhm.
very counterintuitive. But lo and behold, you empty your bowels really easily, no hemorrhoids, no straining if you do it the other way. Your body
Yep.
functions better this way once you figure it out. Or like sitting in a car, on a couch. when we first give people a little bit of lumbar support, they're like, "Oh, that feels good, but also weird. I feel like I'm sitting up so straight,
Right.
like I feel like military, and but after a week, we have ruined their furniture. They can't sit anywhere if they don't have that
Right.
pillow, right? Because now they
Right.
sit poorly and they're like, this feels awful. You're right,
Mhm.
it does. You had just
Yeah.
trained yourself to ignore how awful it felt.
Right.
um, it feels better because this is a better alignment for your body, your spine, your
Mhm.
pelvis, your organs, your
Mhm.
diaphragm, how you breathe, how you think, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
that's what's so, I think, so fun about this work is that people come in with a really debilitating issue, like having to go to the bathroom 10 times a night, right?
Mhm.
And our solution gives them so much more than just not having to go to the bathroom 10 times a night,
Right. Right.
right?
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, and I think you alluded to this earlier. I think when people have some of these different pelvic floor symptoms that we're talking about, it makes their world a lot smaller because of those symptoms kind of limiting, it limits their ability to go out of the house. It limits exercise participation. There's all kinds of levels. And so, what I always say when I'm working with clients, like, yes, we want to get your leakage better. We want to get the pressure symptoms better. We want you to have better, easier bowel movements. And then beyond that, I want your world to be opened up again, to be able to do the things that
Yes.
you want to do. Yes. So
I want
yes,
you to be able
symptom
to go to your
resolution.
grandchild's play
Yes.
and go to
Yes.
Easter service with your family and go
Yes.
to, or be comfortable in, having friends over because your bathroom isn't filled with a bunch of Depend supplies, you
Right.
know,
Right.
um, like recognizing they may not even realize how much smaller their world has become. But
Mhm.
that, I say all the time that I'm not super interested in living really old unless I wanna age well, right? I
Mhm.
wanna live
Yes.
well. Living long without living great is just living
Right.
long really unhappy. And
Right.
I want people to enjoy every moment of their life and every moment of the things that really matter to them. And
Mhm.
this is part of it. And there are so many more things we can talk about that we're not going to be able to get to in this podcast, but what I want to kind of just wrap this podcast up with is us just talking about some simple things that people
Mhm.
might not think would be make a significant impact.
Mhm.
Some simple things we've talked about them, we've touched on them a little bit, but let's give people, just kind of some things that they could,
Some
even if they don't
takeaways.
start,
Yeah.
yeah, even if they don't
Yeah.
see you or they don't start with the tummy team or they don't do any of this yet, know that we want you to come and work with us and we have resources for you or we want you to get the help. But if you want to start somewhere, do you want to start you with some ideas that you want to say?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, just some kind of just some takeaways that I like to just give people. So number 1 would be what I was talking about a little bit ago with my client is how you um how you manage your breath during the day with different activities through the day. So, anytime you have to lift something that has some weight to it, getting out of a chair, for some people, even moving around in bed can be a challenge. Any of those transitional types of movements or lifting through the day, when an activity or a movement is challenging, the strategy that a lot of people automatically go to is holding their breath. So if I have to lift this really heavy bag of dog food, right, I'm going to get a hold of it and I'm going to hold my
Yeah.
breath and I'm going to heave.
Or I
Right?
always tell people that even on the phone, if I'm doing a phone consult, I was like, "Do you ever do this?" Hmm. I make that noise, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I know exactly what you're doing right now."
Yeah.
It's like this little
Yes.
holding of the breath and this grunt that we do with it, right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
it's the way a lot of our bodies have learned to stabilize ourselves in like response
Mhm.
to having resistance or pressure. So this idea that I was talking about with my client of blow as you go. So if you have to lift something really heavy, if you're getting up out of a chair that's really low to the ground, if you're rolling in bed and that feels like a challenging movement to you, if you actually exhale through that movement. So in the dog food example, I kind of get a hold of the dog food, I take a really nice breath in, and then I blow out as I'm doing kind of the hardest part of that movement. So,
Yep.
in doing that, I'm reducing that downward pressure on my pelvic floor, on my bladder, um, on my bowels, kind of reducing and lifting up that pressure. And just because, and this again, this could be a whole other podcast, but just because of the way our breath and our pelvic floor and our deep core muscles interact with each other. If you're exhaling and doing that blowing out without even thinking about it, your core and your pelvic floor are organically in a better position and place to support
Yeah.
you through that movement. So
Yeah.
I always say
They
yeah,
automatically engage without
yeah,
you even knowing you need
yeah,
to. And
yeah,
then through therapy, we actually teach you how to
to
recruit
build on
more of
that.
that engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah, build on
To
that.
build on that.
But
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
like half of it is like the turning off the water in the flood situation. We're not
Yes.
causing this pressure out and pressure down. We're releasing that, but then as we work with them, we actually start working on using the core and pelvic floor functionally every time you get out of a
Yes.
chair, every time you pick up something. So, but
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love the
Yeah.
blow as
So
you go. We
yeah.
say it a
So
ton.
blow as you go, I feel like is a magical strategy that people can
Yes.
start using like today. Yes.
Yeah.
So blow as you go. A couple other common ones I talk to people about. If you are experiencing like constipation, any kind of bladder issue, making just having some thought and intention to like your hydration and your water intake is more water is hugely helpful for bowel function and motility through the digestive tract. A lot of people with bladder leakage tend to say, I'm just not going to drink. So that way I'm not going to have to go. And that way I'm not going to have urgency. I'm not going to leak. And the opposite is actually true. Your bladder is actually happiest when it's kind of filling and emptying on this nice, even cycle through the day.
Yes. We
Yes.
cannot
Mhm.
say that enough. We
Yes.
cannot say that enough that limiting your intake, as much as it seems logically that that would work,
Mhm.
it actually better, definitely impacts your constipation, but also as we get older, dehydration looks like dementia.
Yes.
Our brain needs water. When our brain doesn't get water, we start to be confused, have memory loss, all kinds of things are going on. So, recognizing that hydration is really important and what type of hydration I think is
Right.
important.
Right. Yes,
Like
absolutely.
watching
Yes.
what we're drinking because not all liquid is the same,
Yes, yes,
right?
and there are a lot of, like, common drinks, especially that are considered to be what we think of as bladder irritants, so things that can in not in everyone, but in some people create a little bit more bladder irritation, a little bit more urgency. I always say it's everything good. It's like coffee and tea and soda and wine and some juices, and so, they don't all affect everybody, but it's good to just be aware that there are some things in the diet that can definitely trigger some of that urgency and frequency. So just kind of taking a look at that and figuring out for you, is there a common pattern that you see? And my general rule of thumb to people is if you look at what your total intake of fluid is in a day, a really good goal if 75 to 80% of that fluid intake could be plain water, that would be amazing. And the other 20 could kind of be what it's going to be. Now, as in all of this, we're not going for perfection, but if you can make a small step in that direction to kind of tip the scales
It'll
where
make
you
a
have a
difference.
little bit more regular water than other fluids, that can make a really nice difference. So that would be, a takeaway that you could kind of look at and put into practice. Let me see. Another one would be for people who have some more of those prolapse type symptoms. So, like the pressure kind of symptoms through the day.
Mhm.
I think you mentioned, Kelly, like kind of when you're more symptomatic or just maybe kind of at the end of the day, laying down on your back with either a pillow kind of raising your hips up or laying down kind of on the floor and propping your legs up like on a couch, on an ottoman, kind of getting in a
Mhm.
position where gravity can sort of just gently help relieve some of that pressure and doing some nice breathing. Eventually, if you were working with Kelly or I, learning how to do some pelvic floor and core connection, but just even being in that position can be
Yeah.
really just feel really good for pressure relief at the end of the day or when you're symptomatic. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
even something as simple too, just for people experiencing prolapse, um, wearing like bike shorts or like leggings that are a little bit more compressive when you have to do an activity that's going to require a little bit more effort or exertion, can actually also really help manage symptoms in the short term really well also. Like I have a client who hikes a lot and has some pressure symptoms when she hikes, so she wears kind of like a pair of bike shorts or compressive shorts under her, whatever she's wearing for hiking, just to give a little external layer of support. So that's something
Well,
relatively simple that you can
I
that you
love
can
that.
take away. Yeah.
I love that. And
Yeah.
what's good about that is the compression is somewhat helping, but it also gives a little trigger. The
hmm
compression gives a little trigger to the muscles to be a little bit more active than a little bit more passive. I think the
Correct.
one thing that I
Absolutely.
would add, there's so many things. Honestly, I want people
Yes.
to have hope and be encouraged to know that there are so many things. But the other thing that I would add, I have a whole list of things, but I'm just going to pick one for the sake of time,
Yeah. Yeah.
is sitting posture, watching
Yes.
how much we're sitting on our tailbone versus sitting on our sit bones. And if you've been following the tummy team at all, you know how I talk about neutral pelvis. And neutral pelvic alignment. And I actually have another podcast all on neutral pelvis. We have a series on neutral pelvis. We have lots of different things about sitting and different resources for you at the tummy team. But if you could just, even while you're listening, most of you might be up and around. You might be sitting. If you're standing, I want you to just think about a string from the crown of your head pulling you up tall. And a lot of times that elongating through your whole body will help get your pelvis in a slightly better position. There's other things. We could do pelvic circles, we could do some hamstring stretches. There's a lot of different things. But if I can just get people to elongate, that naturally activates your core and pelvic floor muscles and pulls your pelvis closer to neutral and less in that posterior pelvic tilt, which is that tail tucked position where your everything is pressing down and back into your pelvic bowl. In sitting, if you're sitting, I want you to sit at the edge of your seat, kind of shift your weight a little bit so you're on your sit bones, the bony part that would like be on a bike seat if you were on a bike, and then scoot yourself back in the chair. And you'll notice that you probably need a little bit of lumbar support to sit like that. You want to be sitting more like that pelvic bowl is like a bowl of cereal that's not spilling any milk, more than a tilted back, like all the milk is, pouring out the back of your chair. Okay. So getting into a better alignment, your core and pelvic floor muscles are postural muscles first. They hold structures together, they hold organs in place. They're deep muscles that stabilize and hold your body together. So putting yourself in the best alignment gives them the most opportunity to work. And your body is a use it or lose it system. The more you use a muscle, the stronger it is. The more you neglect a muscle, the weaker it becomes. And so if we can just put you in a better position, naturally, organically, your muscles are going to start working for you. And the way you will know this is that I put you in those positions and you cannot maintain it, right? Why can you not maintain it? Because you are weak, because you have not used those muscles. So, what helps us use it or lose it? So, don't have to be perfect. Just start a little bit. Every time you notice you're sitting poorly, try to sit better. Give yourself some back support. And then, go about your day. Oh, you noticed it again? Just correct and continue. You're not going to be perfect. Just correct and continue, correct and continue. And sooner than you think, these things are going to get better and get easier. Okay, we could talk forever, and we will do we'll do a part two to this, as well as tackle some of the other topics, because it's always really fun to have you on, Megan, and we have lots to share, and we're obviously passionate about these topics. So,
Yes, this was
anything
so
you want to
fun.
leave people with?
I would just say, if you experience or are experiencing some of the things that Kelly and I talked about today, just be encouraged. There is absolutely a path forward for healing, for improvement. And as Kelly and I have been talking about, a lot of the beginning steps and strategies are things that are not that hard to do. Again, they take some thought, but they're strategies that you can kind of embed into your lifestyle that make a huge difference. So be encouraged and just know that there's resources out there to help you along the way.
Yes. And obviously, one of those resources is at the tummy team. So,
Yeah.
not everybody can see somebody in person or has somebody like Megan in their backyard that they could go and see. But, at the tummy team, I've created a lot of resources, and we have a really inexpensive, easy to access membership portal where you can start working on these strategies like right now. So check out what we have at the tummy team. Look at the family membership. Look at, if you want to go into more of our rehab classes, look at the Family Plus membership for our rehab resources. But there's lots and lots of stuff that you can do, and keep listening. We're going to talk more about this in upcoming podcasts. So thanks again, Megan. And thank you,
Thank you,
everybody, for
Kelly.
listening. Yeah, it was
Thanks for
great. All
having
right. We'll talk
me.
to you
Bye
guys soon.
bye. Bye bye.
Bye. Once again, thank you for joining us at the Tummy Team Journey. We would love to help you restore your core and be strong for the life you were meant to live. You can get more practical strategies at thetummyteam.com, and we'll see you next time.